Welcome to Translation Confidential. This is Peter Argondizzo and Patrick Daley, and we are here with episode 143, which is translation myths, which is, again, part of the spirit of why we're here in terms of why we started Translation Confidential all those years ago. So this will be fun. And obviously, there will be some AI points there. Obviously, there's some things to talk about, some myths. We're going to debunk those things today. But Patrick, why don't you get us rolling with today's AI soup du jour? There's always something. So let's hear it. What do you got?
Yeah, we have a news story from our friends over at Slater, and they published an article talking about how some language service providers and researchers recently published some research where they found that large language models that were used for AI translation had a pretty high, in my opinion, a level of hallucinations that came through. For those not familiar, hallucinations are when AI models just make up whatever the output is. It's not really based on facts. It's based on what the AI model thinks you want to hear in that scenario. So they basically just make it up. And kind of the staggering stat that I took away from that is they said that they found hallucination rates ranging from 33% to nearly 60%, depending on what model and architecture and language pair were used, even among some of like what we would consider to be the top language AI models. So that was pretty staggering to me that the number is that high. I think, and we'll get to this in some of the myths, maybe even our first one here, but I think sometimes we're consumed with those flashy demos. But I think getting into the details and the research like this, I think is fascinating.
No, I love this, Patrick, and it's a good segue into these myths. And I think everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, that's ridiculous. I think many people are trying to make this a binary decision. Like, in other words, you are either for AI in translation or you are against. And like all really complex topics, right? It's far more nuanced than that. And of course, that's not the case. AI, again, is just another tool that goes along with what we're doing every day. It's just another tool that we all have to use responsibly and figure out how it works in our respective platforms, right? It's really nothing new. It's just like any other tool in terms of like, it's another tool. And I've just recently saw a news story, which I thought was really amazing. And it talked about, creative destruction, right? And how jobs get destroyed over time, right? Wagon wheel makers, you name it, all those sort of things. Telephone operators was the example they were using, and how there's very few telephone operators.
Typist.
Exactly. But what happens is that, everything moves, and there are other positions and jobs and other things that get created. And I think that's what it is. I think it's the feeling that if I'm a translator, my job's being eliminated, thus I hate AI, right? So that's kind of where that mindset goes. And I would encourage everybody to stop treating this like a zero-sum game, because it really isn't a zero-sum game. That study, I think, helps illuminate it. So,
yeah, another cool part of the study that really stood out to me too is they investigated what triggers hallucinations the most, which again I think is fascinating. So they said that if things were short, which they defined as under 30 characters, there were less hallucinations than something that would be long, which is over 500 characters. And then interestingly enough, they found certain language pairs also produced more hallucinations than others. And you'd think like, okay, maybe some of the less common languages, but the frequent ones they cited for hallucinations were English to Portuguese, English to Japanese, and English to Vietnamese, while English to Chinese, they said, was less affected. So it's not necessarily some of these, what I would consider languages of limited diffusion that don't have a large population that speak that language. Like, these are big languages that are prone to hallucinations.
I mean, that's another interesting point, right? That all the languages aren't created equal in terms of what is in the language models and how effective they are. And again, if an agency is using translation memory in concert with a large language model, I mean, even that, then improves things. There's so many variables. I think it's just far too complex of a discussion to just make it, binary. So I think that's maybe the first myth. But let's go, Patrick. You get us started with number one. What do we got?
Yeah. The first one is that AI can now translate everything perfectly.
I snicker. Yeah, I mean, obviously that study is perfect for that, and there's so many factors. Whether you're talking about where your starting point is, I know Patrick, in the show notes I see garbage in, garbage out. Obviously, how long have we been talking about garbage in, garbage out? Well before AI. That if you have content that is either vague, not descriptive, it's not clear, human translators struggle. So how do you think the robot overlords are going to do? They're not. It's your odds of success are lower because there's the context isn't correct. You're if you start with an OCR scan, right? I mean, that's all of these things are things that will minimize how effective the engine is. So, you talked about those fancy demos, and that's what I think people want to have you see is that, oh my goodness, look, I flip this switch and all of a sudden it's all translated. Isn't it wonderful?
Well, I think a fun use case, if you want to see this kind of in real life, is go to your AI tool of choice and say translate the word charge into whatever language you feel like. Because in English, I can think of a couple of ways that charge could be used. Whether it's kind of the positive negative charge of, let's call it a battery. I need to charge my phone. I just charged something on my credit card. So when you say translate charge, you might get 8 different options of what pops out depending on the context. So if you just kind of do that in a vacuum, it's not going to be perfect by any stretch.
Absolutely. Let's roll to number 2. So human translators are going to disappear. Well, I think there's, popular media has sort of floated this idiocy around. I think even in our own community, we've seen translators say that, oh goodness, I think I've used this phrase, well, I'm going to be a plumber, or I'm going to be an electrician because those jobs aren't going to disappear. That's sort of ridiculous, right? I think it's very dramatic to say, look at how terrible this is, all these jobs that are going to be eliminated. And I think, the point that we've made in previous shows and we make here is that people will use, there will be a higher use of their time, right? So in other words, first pass translation, maybe we'll all get comfortable with the fact that first pass translation is really a draft, and that the translators with the higher skill set come in and fine tune. And of course, models, translation memory, all of that improves. But I think it also puts a really important point on the fact that without the human loop, you never get improvement. There's with anything, if there's no feedback loop, it was, as if you made a pie, but you couldn't eat. And then you just put the pie there and then nobody tasted it and told you, well, it's too much sugar, Patrick. It's not enough sugar. It's not enough brown sugar. It's not enough flavoring. There weren't enough apples. Whatever the case is, you could never improve your pie baking skills. Well, the same goes for translation and the effectiveness of the final document, right? And guess what? Like Patrick said, in terms of the inconsistency and what happens with a large language model, large language models evolve, and they do that by design. So if you don't have that translation memory as the backstop and that feedback loop, you could give the same document to a large language model 3 hours later and get something completely different, which our clients don't like inconsistency. I would say that's the same for most.
Yeah, I think too, it's all about where the translators or linguists or language professionals can add value to the process or to the program or to the project. I think you'll see less of like, okay, I need this document goes straight to a person to translate, then goes back to the client. I think, like you said, you'll see reviewing, editing, but like you said, training those models is a huge step. And that's mentioned in the Slater story as well. If they said these models need large scale like feedback and validation loops to train them to be better in the future. So I think you'll see a bit of that. And I think you'll also see, which I think has been happening naturally over time anyways, is kind of translators get into more specialized roles of, okay, I'm a medical translator, I'm a legal translator. Like those things by design clients may not want them to go through AI. So you need those specialized translators to do those very specialized jobs. But like you said, I think I don't think the job of the translator is going away. I think, like you said, it's going to change, but there will still be language service people adding value to the process no matter what.
Yeah, I would agree, Patrick. This next one is an old trope that I think has been used since the dawn of translation. I remember hearing this in the early days when people would diminish the role of the translator and say, isn't it just, like you take a dictionary and you just swap out the words, right? So translation is just word swapping. So now, my gosh, now that we have computing power at scale, well, we can just swap the words all that much faster. So this translation stuff is easy. And yeah, we all know that's not true, right, Patrick? I mean,
yeah, that's, I think people fall into that trap because they see people who are bilingual in kind of casual conversations and think, oh, that can't be too difficult to write it down then, which obviously we know translation is all written, interpretation is all spoken. But I think until you're kind of put in that position to have to translate or interpret, it is kind of lost in terms of like how much effort and training those things require. For example, I was on a trip to Peru a few years ago, and we had a bilingual guide who at first didn't know I spoke Spanish, which was fun because he was kind of joking with some other people on our tour in Spanish, and I like laughed and like was listening. He's like kind of looked at me like, "Oh, you understand what I'm saying?" But at the end of our trip, he was like, yeah, I don't want to do like both languages today. I'm just going to do Spanish. You do English for everyone else. And I was like, well, great. You're going to pay me, right? Because like this is a high amount
yeah,
of effort to take
I'm not on
you a native.
vacation anymore.
I'm like, take you a native speaker of Spanish from Peru, and you're going fast for me, and you're like, okay, now do all the English. So it's difficult even for those with I have a degree in Spanish. It's still very difficult to do those things if you're put on the spot.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is, this is a skill set that's learned over time and honed over years, right? Some of your most seasoned simultaneous interpreters. I mean, that is a very marketable skill set and not one that's easily come by, especially if you have subject matter expertise in certain domains. Like, I mean, for example, all the famous politicians have specific interpreters that typically do their gigs when they come to DC, to Washington, DC. So, that's, yeah, super important. It's not just swapping words, and it's super easy to make mistakes. I like this one. This one's great. This one's really good.
Yeah, it's we have bilingual employees, so we don't need translation services.
Until you have a sexual harassment case and you pull in a random employee to interpret for either the person who's been harassed or the person who was allegedly on the other side of, unfortunately, that unfortunate behavior. All too often this happens, and I go back to the most simple example, which was my uncle, going back to about 1960s, and this is the south side of Milwaukee, and no one spoke Italian, or at least in this school, and my uncle got in trouble. And the principal said, I want you to call your mother right now and you tell her what you did. So my uncle calls and says, hey, Mom, what are you making for dinner tonight? And she says, oh, it's, we're making some pasta or this and that, braciole or whatever, we're making this and that. And the principal says to my uncle, what did she say? Oh, she's gonna really take care of me when I get home. I'm in huge trouble. And she thanked you for calling. And that's the reason why you don't have someone just that you randomly have do translation. And more seriously, I joke, but more seriously, I mean, there's legal ramifications, right? So from an HR perspective, but there's also like a dignity thing. If you can have a third party that is neutral, you wouldn't want like another employee in when they're complaining about that employee or another employer. What you're going to do is it's simple. It's like you're going to squash the fact that anybody wants to come and talk about issues, or it's a productivity crusher. It just like, well, you wouldn't do that to your English speaking employees, right? You wouldn't say, basically, I don't want to talk to you. The suggestion
Right.
box is the garbage can. I don't want to talk to you. And that's really the message you're sending. Unfortunately, one that we see all too often.
Yeah, and I think really what you said of bringing in that neutral party, especially in sensitive situations too. But I also think like just from an efficiency standpoint, unless you're hiring someone to be a translator or interpreter, like they have a day job that they're worried about. And then you say, hey, come in here and do this language thing for me on the side. That's like not part of their job and not what they should be doing either. Like, again, unless that is their job to be a translator or interpreter. But like, what are you losing by taking them away from whatever they should be doing?
That's another great observation. I mean, strategically, like you'll see this go to salespeople sometimes, and I think you have to talk about your cost of labor as well. Is that so? If you're pulling a salesperson out of the field to create a translation, it's simple math, right? In terms of what the cost of the translation is. And now, in terms of affordability, there's never been a better time to buy translation because, of course, with AI incorporated into most translation workflows these days, it's more affordable now than it ever has been. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense. And I think on that same line of cost, the next one I like a lot, right? Machine translation is free. So why pay an LSP?
I'm going to go to translate.google.com right now and tell you why.
I mean, right? It's kind of crazy. Like, I think I shared the story a few years ago. Being at a trade show, it was SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, and I was telling this gentleman about our SharePoint connector, and he said, "Oh, we have really, really high security. I don't know that we would give you access to SharePoint via an API." And I'm like, "Well, if you want the stuff translated, someone's
going to have access.
Someone's going to have to see this document." I said, "Well, how do you do it now?" And he explained to me, and again, I know I've shared this one, but only for your mom that listens to every episode, Patrick. Maybe someone hasn't heard this story yet, but essentially, he said, "Well, I open the document, I copy, and then I go to Google Translate online, and I paste it in, and I hit translate, and then it gives me the translation, and then I paste it back in." And he was so proud of himself, right? And he had spent half an hour talking to me about all the security protocols and what it takes to become a vendor.
That he just circumvented?
Yeah, I just looked at him. I just stared at him blankly, like, really? And he's like, "Oh, yeah, oh. If you're using free tools, whether it's Google Translate or the free version of OpenAI, the free version of Copilot, you've basically made whatever information you've provided public.
You've sold your data for free.
For free. Can be used for training." And there's a famous legal case. Again, I know we've referred to this, but when machine translation first came to be, I can't say which company, but one of the big companies has a site, and they were using Google's API essentially. And at the time, it was all public domain. And someone put HR documents in there, and it all became searchable fodder. So it all became searchable fodder, and there was a lawsuit. And of course, guess what? The translation company prevailed because it was in their terms and agreement. So there's your lesson learned on that one.
Yeah, I think as a buyer, like, you're not only buying translation services when you engage with a language company. I think you're also buying quality assurance, confidentiality, version control, consistency. There's a lot that's kind of involved in the process that isn't necessarily just the translation itself.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Patrick. Absolutely. You're buying their data security policy is what you're doing. You are essentially buying, hey, how do you handle your data and what do you do? And we now have addendums that go on to our MSAs and SOWs that talk about data privacy and how we use the data. And it's important. It's really, really important. So yeah, free is really super expensive. So keep that in mind. What's next, Patrick?
Yeah, I think the next one is that more languages means more customers, and I'm going to add my own spin, and that means more better, as we like to say.
More bestest. Yes, absolutely. It's my favorite, right, Patrick? When we would, you get a quote request from a small school district, and you go to their website and say, "Hey, can you translate our website? But we want all the languages that it's currently translated." And you click on it, and it's the Google widget.
All 96 of them?
Yeah. My first question is, well, how many students do you have from all 96 of these languages? Well, no. Mostly it's just Spanish and Russian and Korean. Okay, how about we just do Spanish, Russian, and Korean? Let's focus on that and not just randomly put the Google Translate widget. I actually got a client the other day that such a long tail.
Did they find a way to keep it?
No, I think they did until now. And now suddenly they're like, "Oh, the little translate-y thing doesn't work anymore." Well, yes, because Google decided to pull the plug on that years ago. I'm not sure what corner of the world you were in that allowed you to still have it for this long, but you weren't supposed to have it for this long. And, we're talking about Google's free service that they used to allow. You could just add a widget to any website, and through like a client-side process, it would just redraw the page with the translation on it. And they've dropped that a long time ago. But I think, your point here, Patrick, is a really good one. It's, use analytics, use data, figure out who your audience is, and just limit it to the languages that are most important to your community. You don't get a blue ribbon for having it translated into 100 languages if you only need 3.
Only if you're in the government.
Yeah, well, it used to be in the government, because right now translation's not cool. It's all gone from.
Sorry, the EU government. Let's go with that.
Yes, the EU. Let's talk about that.
No, but I think the point is still valid. Of would you rather have 20 languages done okay, or 3 high value languages done really well. And I think kind of the smart decision there is to have the 3 languages done really well, because that can help accelerate your sales growth or reach in your area, rather than kind of 17 bad ones following the 3 good languages that you have. I think another way I'd phrase this one is sometimes no translation is better than crappy translation.
Oh, I would agree. It could be an embarrassment and quite confusing. So, the way Google had that widget as well, it's like you kind of have to know the flags, and it's like I don't see the value in that if you're not, because remember, in translating a website you're trying to create engagement, right? And sometimes that engagement means I'm trying to inform. So if I'm a school district, I'm trying to inform parents of what's out there, what's new, what's happening, what they need to make the school experience for their child much better, right? Or if you're a corporation and you're trying to sell, it's all engagement though. So why do something that might limit or inhibit engagement? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
All right. I love this one. We can fix the bad source after translation. And, if the source is unclear, every translation inherits the problem, right? We get garbage in, garbage out. We talked about that a little bit earlier. I mean, one of the things that we do, standard procedure in terms of our production team, is if we're doing a multilingual project and the French person has a question, what's the very first thing we do? Send the answer to all the languages, because if the French translator has that question, the other languages probably have it as well. And bad source is bad news. It's even worse with AI.
Yeah, I think it's kind of underscoring this kind of, I would call it operations 101, of if you've got a problem at your point when you multiply from 1 to 12 different languages, you've just created 12 problems. So if you can solve that, then you've got 12 answers instead of 12 problems.
And
If you can't tell, Peter and I are both very operational minded.
my gosh, right? I mean, you need to make this as efficient as possible. And there are times that the translation process will flush out changes in the source. And it happens because people will ask a question and the author might say, "Oh, that seemed clear to me. Now I see why that's ambiguous." So it should be like a really good process in terms of what comes out is a better source and better final translations, but you shouldn't lean on that. It shouldn't be a proofreading pass. You should get the document should be as clean as possible.
Yeah, and I would even go as far to say, like, in any translation project, the most important part is the source document, again, because of just how many multiples and multipliers it can introduce. So if you get that right, you can save yourself a lot of headaches and budget overruns in the long run.
Absolutely. What's next, Patrick? What's the next one?
Yeah, this was an interesting one. It says AI removes the need for style guides and glossary. And I think we can get into why people believe this, but I think it's kind of assumed that AI learns everything automatically, which is definitely not the case, as we've talked about. I think we've talked at length about how AI is only as good as what you're inputting or training the model on. So I think this one is very much like the opposite is true of, like, if you have a trained AI model on your style guide and glossary, like, you could be much more successful much faster than just assuming it's going to pick up your style guide. Or assuming that you don't even need one.
Absolutely, Patrick. I mean, your intention should be, when you're deciding to use some form of computer assistance, whether it's in the form of AI or neural machine translation or translation memory or some combination, is to make that process as clean as possible. The more you can arm those resources with, if we step through it, translation memory, we love to have glossaries or term bases, because guess what? That means every time that a sentence comes up that uses that one word, now the translator is prompted to use the correct terminology. The same goes for AI. In fact, if you're doing this ad hoc, you can actually do these things ad hoc through prompts. You can provide style. You can, for those of you that don't know, it's pretty easy. You can write a prompt that says, "Hey, I want to write a style guide for my company. Our website blog at this address, www.argotrans.com/blog, should be your basis. Can you create a style guide?" It will comb through the blog and create a style guide. You can then say, we never translate CMS Connect. That's a trademark term. We never translate these 7 software platforms that
company
we refer
name.
to. Yeah, company name. SharePoint, Contentful, Salesforce. Because again, sometimes, especially with product names or company names, if the company name is, Translation Confidential, our podcast, if you said to AI, you had a sentence and you were using a large language model and you were prompting ad hoc and you gave it a passage and had Translation Confidential in there, if it didn't quite understand that that's the name of a podcast, it likely would try to
I would say
translate
secret translations.
exactly, which is not correct. So that is a real fallacy that AI doesn't need any assistance in terms of creating a good translation.
I mean, the way I think about it is if you were going to take a test and you had the option to just go take the test or have all of the past tests of that same one that's been given out all the years before, why would you not take all of those helpful resources to help you on the test that you're taking in hand?
Absolutely. It seems ridiculous to even debate it. Let's wrap up with this one, Patrick. I think this one's a good one. And I get why people think this one. Turnaround time should be instant with AI. So why is that not the case?
I mean, I think it could be, but I think you have to temper expectations of what the output of that will be. Like, sure, I can go into ChatGPT and say, translate this paragraph, and it will spit something out, but it's probably not going to be very good. So I think we've talked about it before. It's kind of garbage in, garbage out. But if you spend the time to train that model, it will definitely get you much, much farther than just kind of going in blind into that thread or that model and saying, hey, go translate this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, again, we've talked about the applications that want this to be, super sexy. Like, hey, I just flip a switch and look at that. My e-learning project is in 20 languages, or my video now. You simply upload your video to Vimeo and choose translate, and it's available in 20 languages. Isn't that beautiful? And, that's like the attractive part of it that people want to sell. But the reality of it is, as we talked about many times, is that, yeah, without that human in the loop, without the QA, your video could be 95% correct. And that last 5% could be so terrible and awful that it jades their
0 out of 10 is your grading then.
Yeah, exactly. How they feel about what you did, what your effort was. So, yeah, I mean, this was great, Patrick. This is kind of where we do our big takeaway. So we dispelled some myths. What's your takeaway?
Yeah, to me, and I'll caveat that I wasn't necessarily in the industry when machine translation was kind of gaining steam and popularity, but to me, it's kind of staggering to see the similarities of kind of the AI hype or bubble or whatever we want to call it. And when machine translation came out of, I think, the running joke in the translation industry has been for probably 20, 30 years at this point that machine translation is going to put translators out of a job, which is just not true. Again, I think it's the savvy buyers who are and agencies, honestly, who are finding the most helpful use cases to implement these tools rather than just kind of being binary, like you said, of like, nope, we only do machine translation, we only do AI, or we only do human translation. I think you'll see the agencies that will not only survive but thrive through the AI age, as we'll call it, will be the ones who are able to deploy those workflows where it makes sense, and where it will either save the agency time or money, save the client time or money. Like, it has to be helpful. You can't just be deploying this tool just to say we do AI and that's really it. Like, it's got to solve some sort of problem for you.
Yeah, I love that, Patrick. And for me, my takeaway is looking at kind of all the myths we worked through, and something that we talk about often on the show is taking a business problem and working backwards. And it dovetails well with what you were saying as well, is that, all of these things really have to move into a larger strategy. And it doesn't happen unless you start with the business problem, try to solve for that business problem. And any good agency you work with, or any good translation services firm or language technology integrator, or whatever the flavor of the day is, the folks that give you translation can help you with. That's an easy discussion to say, hey, I have this SharePoint database and I need to make that easier to do that translate. Okay, great. What are your budgets? And by the way, when a salesperson asks you, what is your budget? If you trust the salesperson, that's an important number. And even if you give a range, or even if the answer is, well, we don't really have one, we're out here fact finding and we need to know. Okay, great. Well, then that is actually a good answer because they can tell you, all right, we have multiple ways of working through this. So now let's offset where you want your quality to be, where you're, what level of quality assurance do you want, and match it appropriately to your budget. These are all discussions that should be happening. And if they're not happening, then find someone else.
You just hit on project management 101 is you've got time, cost, and quality. And it's a triangle or a pyramid, however you want to, or a Venn diagram, and you get two of them. And if you find someone who can get you all three, awesome, run with them. But typically you're going to get two of those.
Absolutely. They're opposing forces, right? So
the triple constraint for those project management nerds out there like me.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Patrick, this was fun as always. Thank you all for tuning in for this episode of Translation Confidential. This is Peter and Patrick signing off.